It only takes a moment for a child to vanish. 1 second, you're tying your boots. The next, the back door is open, snow whipping through the screen, and your 6-year-old is gone. That was exactly what happened to Amanda and Ray Thatcher on the coldest day of the year in Echo Creek, Colorado. A blizzard had been breathing down their necks all week, but when Eli asked if he could walk home from the bus stop by himself, just 4 blocks, they had said yes. After all, this was a quiet town, the kind of place where people still waved when they passed you on the street. But now, as the wind screamed and the thermometer plunged below zero, that quiet town had become a frozen maze. And somewhere in that whiteout was a little boy with freckles, a red puffer jacket, and a tendency to chase squirrels without telling anyone. The entire town had begun to search. By nightfall, there were footprints, and then there weren't. Sheriff Mallory stood at the edge of the woods, lips pressed into a hard line, listening to the radio static. The volunteer crews had nothing. The fire department's drone was grounded, and the snow kept falling. Relentless, blinding, angry. She turned to the man beside her, gripping a leash tight in his gloved hand. The German shepherd next to him was pacing, nose twitching, ears up. Every time the wind shifted, the dog leaned into it, pulling forward. "Scout's restless," said Officer Jace Nolan, voice muffled behind a frost-covered scarf. "He smells something." Mallory nodded. "Let's go." Scout was more than just a dog. He was a legend in Echo Creek. Trained in Denver, served 2 years with search and rescue in Utah, then came back here with Jace when the officer returned home to care for his sick dad. Since then, Scout had found hikers, seniors with Alzheimer's, and once even a toddler lost in the cornfields. But this was different. This was a child. In a blizzard, the cold didn't care about timelines. Every hour that passed made it harder. Footprints were erased. Scents were buried. Even sound was swallowed whole. You could scream for help, and no one would hear you past 20 yards. Scout pulled Jace down the trail, weaving between trees like he knew exactly where to go. Snow was up to Jace's knees, and every step felt like dragging a cinder block. But the dog, he moved like he was born for this. They reached a narrow bend near the frozen creek. Something made Scout stop cold. His ears snapped up. He started sniffing frantically in a tight circle, pawing the snow. Jace leaned down. "What is it, boy?" Then he saw it, half buried in the snow. A red mitten. Meanwhile, back at the command post set up in the Thatcher's garage, Amanda sat wrapped in 3 blankets, staring at the spot where Eli's coat used to hang. Volunteers came and went, whispering, shaking their heads, trying not to make eye contact. A neighbor brought soup. No one touched it. Ray hadn't spoken in 2 hours. A TV reporter hovered nearby but hadn't turned on the camera, because no one wanted to cover a tragedy. They wanted a miracle. Out in the field, Scout was locked in. He pawed furiously, growling low in his throat, digging through a drift with the kind of purpose only a trained canine possessed. "There's nothing here," muttered one of the deputies who had caught up. "No footprints beyond this point. Kid probably turned around." Scout growled louder. "He's telling you something," Jace snapped. "You doubt a dog that's found 6 people in the last 2 years?" The deputy backed off, and then Scout barked. One sharp, piercing bark. Jace dropped to his knees and started digging. Let's pause for a second. If stories like this matter to you, real stories of animals doing the impossible to save human lives, please take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Heroes for Animals. These incredible 4-legged heroes deserve to be seen, remembered, and celebrated. It's free, and it helps keep stories like this alive. Now back to Scout. The wind picked up, flinging snow like daggers against Jace's face. His fingers were numb, but he didn't stop. Scout was barking now, louder and more desperate, like something was just beneath the surface. Suddenly, his hand broke through. It was an air hole, tiny, barely the size of a fist, but warm air was escaping from it. Jace's heart slammed into his ribs. "We've got something!" he yelled. Radio chatter exploded. Within minutes, backup arrived with shovels, thermal gear, and medical bags. Jace never let go of Scout's leash the whole time. The dog stayed put, crouched beside the hole, nose pressed to the snow, tail rigid like a flag in battle. It took them 15 minutes to clear enough to lower a thermal camera into the cavity. The image came back, a heat signature, small, curled, alive. They shouted into the hole, hoping for a response. Nothing. Jace reached down with a gloved hand, wriggled through the opening, and felt soft fabric. Then fingers. Tiny fingers. He felt a twitch. "He's breathing," Jace whispered. I got him." They worked fast. The snow cave was no more than a hollow formed by branches and fallen snow. It must have been a fluke of the wind and trees, just enough to keep Eli from freezing completely. They would later say that if Scout had led them even 10 minutes later, Eli would have slipped beyond recovery. But that moment, pulling the limp but warm boy from the icy hollow, the town held its breath. Scout sat and watched, his fur dusted white, tongue lolling. Like he knew. Like he always did. Eli was rushed to the hospital where doctors confirmed it. Mild hypothermia, early frostbite on his fingers, but stable. Amanda collapsed in the ER hallway, sobbing with relief. Ray held her for the first time in what felt like days. When they asked Eli how he had survived, he answered quietly, "I got lost. Then I saw the snow make a hole, so I crawled in and waited for someone." They asked if he saw anyone. He hesitated. "I thought I heard a voice, but it wasn't my dad's." When asked again, he said, "A man told me to stay quiet, but I don't remember his face." That was when the sheriff started looking closer at the location. Why had Eli ended up so far from the road? Why were there no tracks leading in or out? And why had he mentioned a man? But those questions would have to wait. Tonight, the town had their miracle, and a dog named Scout had just proven once again that when all hope is buried in snow, sometimes it takes 4 legs and a heartbeat to dig it out. The snowstorm had passed, but it left behind a silence that wrapped around Echo Creek like a thick wool blanket, muted, heavy, and cold. The town had a boy to celebrate, and a dog. Scout's photo was plastered across the front page of the Echo Creek Chronicle, tongue lolling, fur still frosted from the snow dig, standing proud next to Officer Jace Nolan. People were calling him a miracle dog, a 4-legged angel. The town bakery even renamed its sugar-dusted croissants after him, Scout's Snow Paws. But while the town rejoiced, Sheriff Mallory couldn't stop thinking about one thing. "A man told me to stay quiet." That phrase from Eli replayed in her mind like a skipping record. Kids said strange things under stress. That was true, but 6-year-olds didn't make up details like that for no reason. She'd raised 2 boys of her own. One was a wild storyteller. The other didn't talk unless you bribed him with peanut butter cups. But both had one thing in common. They only told that kind of lie when they were trying to hide something, not when they'd nearly frozen to death in the woods. "Let's walk it again," she told Jace 3 days after the rescue. The two stood at the edge of the clearing, Scout pacing in the snow. The sun was out now. The melt had begun, though chunks of ice still clung to branches, and the snowbanks were stubborn. The place was still, eerie, like nature was holding its breath. Jace adjusted his scarf and nodded toward the trees. "Same trail?" "Exactly, and I want to see where it ends." Scout didn't need words. The leash went taut, almost immediately, nose low to the earth, weaving side to side like a living compass. They followed him down the familiar path, past the bent tree where the mitten had been found. But this time, they kept going. Past the snow cave, past where the search ended. Jace frowned. There's nothing beyond here. Mallory didn't speak. She watched Scout. The dog stopped again. Same spot. Ears high. Tail frozen. Nose twitching. He started circling, not in a random pattern, but a tight loop, again and again, pawing once or twice into the snow as if unsure. Then he did something unusual. He howled. Not a bark, not a whine. A full, heart-deep howl. Jace blinked. That's not like him. No, it's not, Mallory said, brows furrowing. Scout's telling us something. Something's off. The next day, she brought in a canine behaviorist from Denver. A retired handler named Curtis Bell, now in his 60s, with a limp and more dog hair on his coat than anyone in the sheriff's department. He watched Scout work for 20 minutes and then said quietly, "This dog smells human scent. Not the boys, someone else's." Mallory's stomach turned. Could it be residual? Search team, maybe? Bell shook his head. Nope. He's not acting like it's stale. He's acting like it's recent, confused, like the scent stops short. Jace muttered, like someone was standing right here, and then vanished. Bell glanced at the snow-covered trail and raised an eyebrow. Or went airborne. The next lead came from an unlikely source. A kid. Teenager named Ben Franklin. Yeah, seriously. That was his name. 14 years old, braces, obsessed with drones. He'd flown his Christmas gift quadcopter high over the woods on the morning Eli went missing. And, like most kids, he'd forgotten to delete the footage before recording new stuff. When Mallory heard about it, she drove to his house and sat through an hour of GoPro footage that looked like it had been shot during an earthquake. But at minute 47, something caught her attention. A flash of red in the trees. Then, a figure, dark coat, standing, still. It was only a second, a single frame. But it was there. She paused it, leaned in. A man, alone, facing the trees, watching something. She pulled Jace aside the next day. You remember the old ranger station up by Miller's Ridge? Yeah, they shut it down after the wildfires 2 summers ago. I want to check it out. He looked at her, then down at Scout. You think someone took Eli there? I don't know what I think. But if someone told that boy to stay quiet, then it wasn't the woods doing the whispering. They hiked out at dawn. Scout led. He always did. His paws crushed through ice crusts with a steady rhythm. Mallory carried her service pistol under her parka. Jace had a thermos of black coffee and a stormy look in his eyes. The station looked exactly how she remembered. Half-burnt, moldy, the roof caved in. A rusted propane tank leaned on its side out front, covered in snow graffiti. They didn't find much. A broken lantern, some old ranger maps. But Scout didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't even sniff with interest. Nothing. They were just about to head back when Scout stopped. Tail high, nose twitching. He walked behind the cabin. Then he sat, right next to a patch of snow that had melted more than the rest. Jace crouched, brushed the surface. Cigarette butts, fresh. Mallory pulled one out with gloved fingers. Someone's been here in the last 48 hours. They filed a report, quietly. No press, no public updates. Because what if someone had watched Eli? What if someone had led him into the woods on purpose? What if this wasn't a rescue story but a close call with something darker? Mallory knew the town didn't want fear. They wanted closure. But she also knew this. Scout had picked up a second scent. And that meant someone else had been out there. Later that week, Amanda Thatcher stopped by the station to thank Scout. She brought dog treats shaped like snowflakes and a hand-drawn thank you card from Eli, covered in glitter and misspelled words. Scout sniffed the bag, took a treat gently from her hand, and licked her wrist like he knew what she'd been through. As Amanda turned to leave, she paused. There's one more thing, she said, glancing back. Eli keeps drawing this man in his notebook. All black clothes, no face. Says he talked to him in the snow, whispered things, told him to go into the cave. Mallory's fingers curled around the edge of her desk. You think he imagined it? Amanda looked up. Her eyes were tired. Maybe, but he drew the same man 10 times, always in the same place, standing by the trees just out of sight. That night, Mallory stood alone at the trailhead. Snow crunched behind her. She turned. No one. Just Scout, waiting, staring into the trees, unmoving, listening, like he could hear something that the rest of them were still too human to understand. Eli Thatcher slept with the light on now. It had been 2 weeks since the rescue, and though his bruises had faded and the frostbite was healing, something else lingered, something deeper. He no longer ran to the door when his dad got home. He didn't ask to play outside. He didn't even want to eat the chocolate chip pancakes his mom used to bribe him out of bed on weekends. Instead, he drew, over and over again, the same thing, a man in black, with no face. Sometimes in the woods, sometimes standing over the snow cave, sometimes whispering something to a small stick figure of Eli. When Amanda brought the notebook to Sheriff Mallory, she didn't say anything. She just handed it over, eyes full of something between fear and heartbreak. Mallory flipped through the drawings silently. Every page made her gut twist a little tighter. She knew trauma, had seen how kids coped. But this wasn't your average nightmare fuel. These drawings weren't wild or erratic. They were focused, specific, and they repeated the same image in nearly identical composition. It wasn't random. It was a memory. That same evening, Mallory called Jace into her office. "Do we still have access to the wildlife cams from the Eastern Trail system?" she asked. Jace leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. "The ones set up by the conservation guys?" "Yeah," he nodded. "I can make a call. Why?" Mallory opened the notebook again and turned it toward him. "I think Eli saw someone, and I think that someone is still out there." Jace stared at the faceless figure drawn in black ink. "You really think this is real?" "I don't know, but I'm tired of waiting for proof to come to us." 2 days later, a ranger named Pete Harper dropped off a hard drive at the sheriff's office. "Most of the cams froze up during the storm," he said, removing his hat. "But a few along the lower ridge stayed running." Mallory popped the drive into her laptop and started scanning. Most of it was what you'd expect. Deer trudging through snow, foxes darting between trees, the occasional bobcat sniffing a lens. Hours of silence and snow, until one clip. Timestamp, 4:03 p.m., the day Eli disappeared. A shadow moved across the far edge of the frame. A man, alone, moving slow, purposeful. The clip wasn't clear enough to see a face, but his posture, rigid, arms held stiff at his sides, matched something in Eli's drawings almost perfectly. Mallory paused the video. "That's not a rescue worker." Jace leaned in. "And he's coming from the exact direction Scout was barking toward." That was the first real crack in the story everyone else thought was already over. Back on the trail, Scout picked up a scent again. It had been a mild morning for February. Snowmelt dripped from the trees, and the forest floor was soft and slushy. But Scout didn't mind. His nose was locked in, pulling Jace forward like a bloodhound on a mission. They followed the scent past the original search zone, past the snow cave, past the ridge with the cigarette butts. This time, Scout kept going, deeper into the woods, beyond the old ranger trails. They reached a clearing just past a creek where the ice was thinning. Scout stopped. He barked twice, then began circling slowly, tail stiff, body alert. Jace stepped forward, scanning the area. "What is it, buddy?" That's when he saw it, half buried beneath pine needles and a patch of ice, a plastic wristband, hospital style. Jace squatted and peeled it up carefully. The name had been scratched out, but a partial barcode remained. "Mallory's gonna want to see this." Back at the station, they ran the wristband through state databases. It was issued by Rockwell Behavioral Facility, a state mental health hospital 2 towns over. Mallory frowned. "Runaways?" "Possibly," said Jace. "Or releases. That place isn't exactly Fort Knox." They reached out to Rockwell the next morning. 2 patients had been released within the last month. One of them, a man named Daniel Mays, 41 years old, had been discharged 3 weeks before the blizzard. Diagnosis? Schizoaffective disorder with delusional episodes. History of wandering. No known violent behavior, but severe episodes if off medication. He had no current address. No family. Just a discharge notice and a one-way bus ticket to nowhere. "I want to know if he ever made it to that bus," Mallory said. Jace was already pulling up traffic camera logs. "If he didn't, we need to find out where he went and what he was doing in those woods." That night, Amanda Thatcher called the sheriff. Eli had something to say. He was quiet when they arrived, wrapped in a blanket, holding the same beat-up stuffed tiger he'd had since he was a baby. His voice was barely above a whisper. "The man in the snow," he said, eyes locked on Scout. He was humming. "Humming what?" Mallory asked gently. "I don't know. A song. But he said it would keep me safe." "Did he hurt you?" Eli shook his head. "He made me cocoa, told me to wait in the snow cave. He said my mom would find me soon." Mallory's heart sank. This wasn't just a man wandering the forest. This was intentional. Jace sat beside Eli, voice calm. "Did he have a name?" The boy hesitated. "He said he was an angel." By the next morning, Mallory had a team combing hospital records, checking bus stops, even interviewing homeless shelters within a 50-mile radius. There were no signs of Daniel Mays in any of them. But then a tip came in from a hiker. Someone had seen a man matching Mays's description near the old mining tunnels north of the ridge, a place no sane person went in winter. Dangerous, unstable, riddled with shafts and sudden drops. But Scout could handle it, and he was already pacing at the door, as if he knew it was time. The hike up was brutal. Snowmelt had frozen overnight, turning the trail into slick glass. Scout led with confidence, his paws sure even where boots slipped. Mallory followed behind, her breath clouding in the air, one hand resting on her hip holster, not because she expected trouble, but because something about this didn't feel right anymore. They reached the tunnel mouth by mid-morning. Scout didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just walked inside. Jace clicked on his flashlight. "Let's go." The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for one person at a time. Moisture dripped from the ceiling. Somewhere deep in the dark, something clanged faintly, like wind catching metal. Scout stopped just before a split in the passage. He turned to the left, then sat. Jace stepped forward and aimed his light. There, sitting in the corner of the passage, wrapped in a torn blanket, was a man. Thin, pale, eyes distant, but calm. Daniel Mays. They brought him in quietly. No cuffs, no incident. When asked why he led Eli into the woods, Mays smiled faintly and said, "The boy was cold. I found him wandering. I thought I was meant to protect him. Like before." "Before what?" Mallory asked. He didn't answer, just looked past her at Scout. "He's a good one," Mays whispered. "He listens." Later, alone in the break room, Jace leaned against the counter, stirring sugar into his coffee. "He's not evil," he said to Mallory. "Sick, yeah, but he didn't mean harm." "I know," she replied, "but that doesn't mean he won't do harm next time." Outside, Scout sat by the window, eyes fixed on the woods beyond, as if waiting, as if listening. Because sometimes the snow buries more than footprints. It buries the truth, and sometimes it takes a dog to dig it back out. Scout hadn't barked in 3 days. Not once. Not at passing dogs, not at the mail truck, not even at the squirrel that had practically dared him from the fence post behind the station. Jace noticed it immediately. The old shepherd, who used to announce every knock at the front door with a single sharp woof, was now silent. But it wasn't exhaustion. It was something else. Scout had gone still, focused, and that usually meant trouble was just ahead. Daniel Mays was transferred to a secure psychiatric ward in Denver, but he didn't speak much after the initial intake. His statement was officially logged. He had found Eli Thatcher wandering, cold and lost, and believed he was being guided to protect the boy.
He thought he was an angel.
Jace told Mallory, standing by her desk late that Friday afternoon. Mallory rubbed her eyes and sighed. I'm not sure what worries me more, that he thought he was an angel, or that he wasn't the first to say it. Jace tilted his head. What do you mean? She opened a file, one that hadn't seen daylight in years. You remember Emily Case? Mallory asked. Jace paused. The name jogged something. Wasn't she the teenager that went missing during a winter storm? What, 6, 7 years ago? 8, Mallory corrected. She was 15. Disappeared on her way to the bus stop. Found 2 days later, half frozen, but alive. Curled up in a snow cave, just like Eli. Jace blinked. I never connected that. Mallory handed over a photocopied statement from the archive. Emily Case had described someone watching over her in the snow. She called him the Humming Man. He told me to be still. Said someone would come. Said he was an angel and he only helped the lost. Mallory looked up. Sound familiar? Scout lay under the desk, head up, ears twitching. He knew that name too. That weekend, Mallory and Jace drove to visit Emily Case, now 23, living with her husband in a small town 2 hours south. She looked different now, stronger, confident. But when Mallory mentioned the snowstorm, her shoulders tightened. I haven't thought about that day in years, Emily said. I mean, not out loud. Jace nodded gently. We're trying to understand what really happened out there. You mentioned someone helped you? She hesitated. I know how it sounds. And back then, I thought maybe I imagined it. My parents told me it was just shock, trauma, but I swear, someone was there. A man? She nodded. Black coat, face kind of fuzzy, but he was calm, said I shouldn't move, said if I stayed very still, someone would find me. Jace leaned forward. Did he touch you? No, never. He just watched. Hummed a song I didn't recognize. Then he walked into the trees and vanished. Mallory showed her a photo of Daniel Mays. Emily stared at it for a long time, then shook her head. No, that's not him. Back in the truck, Jace leaned on the steering wheel. So either we've got 2 delusional Good Samaritans wandering the woods over a decade apart, or one man, Mallory said quietly, has been doing this a very long time. By Monday, the snow started falling again. Scout wouldn't rest. He paced the station constantly, whined when no one paid attention, barked softly at the window, then growled at nothing. Something's coming, Jace muttered. He always knows before we do. That night, the call came in from a logging crew working a few miles outside Echo Creek. Strange symbols carved into tree trunks, deep into the woods. Fresh, not weather-worn. Looked like initials and dates. Mallory drove out herself with Scout and Jace. They reached the site just before dusk. The air was sharp, but not yet biting. Pines surrounded the area like cathedral walls, and the snow fell in slow, soundless sheets. One tree had 4 dates carved into the bark. 2016, 2019, 2021, 2023. Next to each, 2 letters. ECKJLMET. Jace squinted. These look like initials. Mallory didn't answer. She was already flipping through the missing persons reports. Emily Case, she said aloud. Kyle Jenkins, Leah Montrose, and now Eli Thatcher. Scout barked, then took off into the trees. They ran after him, branches whipping past their arms and cheeks, breath puffing in fast clouds. Scout didn't slow. He bounded through snow like it was nothing, weaving between trees, guided by something primal and true. When he stopped, they nearly missed him. He was standing over a wooden hatch, almost buried under pine needles and snow. Old, cracked, hidden. Jace pried it open with a crowbar from the truck. The air that escaped was foul, damp and rotten. A narrow staircase led underground. Mallory clicked on her flashlight. We go slow. The space below wasn't large, maybe the size of a backyard shed, but it was full. Newspapers, maps, cans of food, children's books, a mattress on the floor, a space heater, a shrine of sorts, decorated with pieces of clothing, and a dozen drawings taped to the wall, all of them drawn in crayon. All of them showed the same thing: a faceless man standing near the woods. Jace exhaled slowly. "We've got ourselves a predator." "Or a collector," Mallory whispered. They bagged everything. Scout sat in the center of the room and didn't move, like he'd finally found what he'd been chasing. That night, Mallory called Eli's mom. "I need to ask about those drawings Eli's been making," she said gently. Amanda hesitated. "He stopped a few days ago. Said the angel was gone." Mallory's fingers gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" He said, "He doesn't watch me anymore. He found someone else." The storm rolled in the next morning, harder than the last. And somewhere in the woods, just past the edge of town, Scout stood on a ridgeline, nose in the air, tail stiff. His eyes scanned the forest like a soldier, because he knew what they were only beginning to realize. The boy had been saved, but someone else had just been chosen. Snow was falling sideways. Wind howled like a living thing, clawing at the trees as Scout stood at the edge of the woods. His ears were pinned back against his head, fur rippling in gusts that turned the pines into ghosts. But he didn't move. His paws were frozen to the ridge, eyes locked on something invisible to everyone else. Beside him, Officer Jace Nolan squinted into the blizzard, one hand on Scout's harness. They had been standing there for nearly 10 minutes, just listening, searching for a sound that hadn't come yet. Then, all at once, Scout jerked forward. Not a slow pull, a violent lunge like something deep inside him had snapped awake. It started with a phone call 2 hours earlier. A woman named Carolyn Mays, Daniel's sister, called from Denver. She had heard about the arrest, saw her brother's face on the news. What she said made Mallory's stomach turn. He had a journal, Carolyn told her, one he kept even after treatment. He said he wasn't the only one. Said there were others. Called them Watchers. Said they believed in protecting the chosen ones. "Did he name any of them?" Mallory asked. Carolyn hesitated. "Just initials, MJ." That's when the storm sirens went off, because across town another child was missing. 7-year-old Isla Monroe, last seen walking her dog near the back edge of her family's property, close to the woods. The dog came back without her. The gate had been left open. Snow had already erased any footprints. The mother was hysterical. The father tried to chase the trail himself and slipped on black ice, breaking his arm. Mallory was already in her cruiser before the full report finished. And Scout? Scout was already at the door when Jace grabbed the leash. Now, they were back in the forest, fighting wind, bitter cold, and time. Scout yanked harder, dragging Jace down an incline. Mallory followed behind, radio in hand, barking updates to dispatch. "There's no sign yet," she said, "but the dog's tracking something fast." 10-4, came the response. "Visibility's at 30 feet and dropping." Scout veered sharply, darting under fallen branches and weaving between trunks with uncanny precision. "He's locked in," Jace muttered, "just like with Eli." They followed him for 20 minutes, crossing through thick woods along a frozen stream and into a section of trail long abandoned. Then Scout stopped, not gradually, abruptly. He stood over a patch of disturbed snow near the base of a pine and barked 3 times. Jace dropped to his knees and started digging with his gloves. Snow flew in every direction as Scout pawed beside him. Then he hit something soft. A wool hat. Pink. Isla's. Mallory's heart hammered. "Start a grid search," she barked into the radio. "Get search and rescue out here now." Then suddenly, Scout took off again. They chased him into a narrow ravine that dipped between 2 hills. It was darker here, the canopy above thicker. The snow softened, muffling their footsteps. Jace slowed. "There," he whispered. In the distance, a cabin, not marked on any map. Half collapsed, wooden beams sagging under the weight of snow, and inside flickering light. A lantern! Mallory drew her weapon. "Scout!" Jace said, tightening the leash. But the dog didn't move. He growled low, teeth barely showing. Not aggressive, just warning. They approached carefully. Mallory kicked the door gently. It creaked open. Inside, the room was small. Wood stove long dead. A cot, some food wrappers, a camping lantern, and in the far corner, a man sitting cross-legged, gently rocking. Wrapped in a blanket in his lap was Isla Monroe, unconscious, but breathing. "Hands where I can see them," Mallory ordered, gun raised. The man didn't flinch. "I kept her warm," he said softly. "The storm was too much. I had to bring her here." "Put her down and step away." He did, slowly, whispering something to the girl as he lay her on the cot. Mallory cuffed him quickly. He didn't resist. Back at the station, EMTs confirmed Isla would be okay. Mild exposure, slight dehydration, no injuries. But her story— "I was walking Ginger," she said, voice shaky. "Then a man called to me from the trees, said he knew my daddy. Said Ginger ran ahead and I should come help." "Did you see his face?" She shook her head. "He had a scarf and goggles, but he kept humming. I didn't want to go, but he said Ginger was hurt." The man gave his name as Mark Jensen, 48. No criminal record, no address. But in his backpack, they found a notebook. Inside were pages of writing, names, dates, phrases like, "She is safe now," and "I hear the calling." Dozens of drawings, faceless men, and dogs, always the dogs. "What do you think they are?" Jace asked later, staring at the notebook. "Some cult?" Mallory offered. "A belief system? Maybe something born from shared delusion?" "Or trauma," Jace said. "They think they're saving kids, but they're taking them. No permission, no understanding of danger." "Daniel said he was chosen," Mallory murmured. "Now we've got another claiming the same." They fell quiet. Scout lay nearby, eyes open, watching the door. 3 days passed. The snow melted, and things slowly returned to normal. Eli smiled again. Isla went home. The town exhaled, but Mallory couldn't shake it. Not the drawings, not the names, because something had changed. These men weren't just wanderers or mentally ill loners. They had patterns. They had timing. They had targets. And they had eyes in the woods. On the 5th day, Scout stood by the window again, growling, low, almost imperceptible. Jace walked over and opened the blinds. Nothing. But then he saw it, a shape at the edge of the forest. Too far to make out, gone in an instant. That night, Mallory drafted a memo to the regional FBI office. Attached were incident reports, drawings, journal excerpts, and the list of initials from the tree carvings. She gave it a title: Patterned Abductions Disguised as Rescue, the Watcher Network Hypothesis. And in her closing line, she wrote, "We've been treating these as isolated miracles, but what if they're coordinated trials? And what if the only thing that stopped them is a dog who refuses to stop watching?" The next morning, Scout led Jace on a walk. Not for training, not for duty, just instinct. They reached the ridge again, the one from the start. Scout sat, looked out over the trees, ears twitching, nose in the wind, not afraid, just ready, because somewhere out there they were still watching. But so was he, and as long as Scout had breath in his body, he would find every last one of them. Spring came slowly to Echo Creek. Snow didn't just melt here. It retreated, like a secret slipping back into the earth. What had once been blanketed in white was now patchy and wet, dotted with fallen branches and green pushing through slush. The world looked brighter, but some things hadn't thawed. Sheriff Mallory stood at the edge of the woods, arms crossed, eyes scanning the trees like she had a score to settle. And maybe she did, because the woods had kept too many secrets for too long. And so had the people who passed through them. Canine Scout trotted beside her, tongue out, tail wagging softly, but his ears stayed alert. Even as kids returned to the playground and bikes rolled down sidewalks, Scout remained locked in, listening for something no one else could hear. "Still not convinced it's over, huh?" Mallory muttered, half to herself, half to the dog. Scout didn't answer. answer. He never did. But Mallory understood, because she wasn't convinced either. Over the past month, the town had moved on in the way towns do. Stories faded. Headlines were replaced. Parents hugged their kids tighter at night. But life had resumed. The story of Eli and Isla had become legend. A little too neat. A little too finished. And it didn't sit right. Because Mallory knew better. They hadn't stopped the Watchers. They'd just peeled back a layer. A week after Isla's rescue, FBI agents arrived. They were polite, efficient, and just skeptical enough to make you doubt everything you'd seen. They reviewed the files, interviewed the suspects, and left with boxes of evidence and a lot of theories. But no arrests, no network, no one else. Case closed, at least on paper. Mallory had read enough behavioral profiles to know a cult didn't have to wear robes or chant by candlelight. Sometimes it was just a belief that took root in broken people. Sometimes it was a voice you thought only you could hear. Sometimes it was a man in a black coat whispering in the woods. And the scariest part? Sometimes it sounded kind. Jace had taken time off after the Isla case. He spent a few days fishing with his brother in Montana. Came back with a beard and a lot of quiet thoughts. When he walked back into the station, Scout practically knocked him over. "You miss me, partner?" Jace asked, scratching behind the dog's ears. Scout licked his face. Yes, loud and clear. Jace looked around the squad room and asked, "So, where do we go from here?" Mallory handed him a folder. One word was written across the front in red Sharpie. "Still watching." The folder was filled with names, not suspects, survivors. Children who had gone missing in the past 10 years during winter storms in rural towns across the Midwest and Northwest. All found alive, all claiming someone had helped them. All with stories about humming men, angels in the woods, or safe places made of snow. It was bigger than Echo Creek, and they had just scratched the surface. They started building a map. Scout watched. Then one night he stood at the door and barked. Twice. Jace stood up. "What is it, bud?" Scout whined and looked at the window. There was no storm, no call, no child missing, just stillness. But the bark, it wasn't panic. It was a signal, a beginning. That weekend, Mallory, Jace, and Scout drove 5 hours north to the town of Dry Hollow, Montana. It was small. Snow still lingered in the shadows, and a boy had gone missing there last December, only to be found curled in a hollowed tree, alive, with the same story. No one had followed up. Until now. They knocked on the family's door. The mother answered. Thin, tired, grateful. Her son, Brady, peeked from behind her leg. He was 9, big eyes, quiet. Scout stepped forward. Brady's eyes lit up. "That's him," he whispered. Mallory's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Brady looked down. "He's not the same one, but he smells like the one who found me." They all froze. Jace crouched beside the boy. "Smells like him?" Brady nodded. "The other one, he smelled like dog, like this one, but different." Back at the motel, Mallory pieced together something chilling. What if these men weren't acting alone? What if they were following something? Someone? Or something? Scout paced at the door again. That night, Mallory dreamed of a cabin deep in the woods, surrounded by symbols. And inside, a man humming to a child, telling them to wait. That they were special. That they were chosen. When she woke up, she found Scout standing beside her bed. Alert, focused, nose toward the door. The next trip was to Wisconsin. Then Idaho. Then a tiny logging town in Oregon. Each time, they found another child, another drawing, another story. Always the same pattern. Always the same melody described in whispers. But no man, no arrest, only traces. Months passed. Then, one foggy morning back in Echo Creek, a letter arrived. Unmarked. Inside, a drawing. Crayons, childlike. A snow cave, a faceless man, a dog. And a message scribbled at the bottom. Thank him for watching. Mallory stared at it for a long time, then handed it to Scout. He sniffed it, then looked at the woods. Just like always, the case would never make national headlines. There would be no Dateline special, no Netflix docuseries, because it wasn't the kind of evil that wore a name tag. It was soft, patient, misunderstood, but real and dangerous. And it hunted the vulnerable in storms. But there was a dog who hunted back. Scout retired officially that fall. His hips had started to ache. He slept more. But he still perked up every time a radio crackled or a boot hit the gravel out back. Mallory and Jace threw him a party. The whole town came. Kids hugged him. Parents cried. They gave him a silver medal, but he chewed the ribbon. He didn't care about the recognition. He just watched the trees. Still, always. Years later, when Scout finally passed, they buried him at the edge of the forest, under the ridge where he'd first howled at the wind. They carved a stone with no dates, just one line. He listened when no one else did. Thank you for following the story of Canine Scout. His loyalty, his instincts, and his quiet heroism saved lives and uncovered truths most were too afraid to see. Now we'd love to hear from you. Do you believe animals can sense evil? Things we can't see or understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if Scout's story moved you, don't forget to follow Heroes for Animals for more real stories of courage, loyalty, and the bond that saves lives.